Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Monday, the 22nd of December in London. I'm Caroline Hepker. Gunboat diplomacy. The US pursues a third tanker off the coast of Venezuela, aiming to throttle Maduro's oil revenues. Productive and constructive. The US and Ukraine praise weekend talks in Florida despite no obvious breakthrough on ending Russia's war. Plus, a new direction. Uber, Lyft and Baidu join forces to test driverless cars in London. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. The US Coast Guard is chasing down a third oil tanker as President Trump's blockade of the country ramps up. The tanker, called Bella 1, is being pursued off the coast of Venezuela after the US also seized a different non-sanctioned vessel over the weekend. Bloomberg's East America editor, Tony Chuchka, says the US is clearly trying to damage Venezuela's economy.
Over the weekend, this kind of noose that the Trump administration is trying to tighten economically around the government of Nicolás Maduro in Venezuela has been tightening. At the same time, the government has not been very forthcoming, sort of come out in dribs and drabs, but the overall purpose is very clear, which is essentially to deprive Venezuela of its main revenue, which is oil exports.
Chuchka adds that Venezuela's oil exports have dwindled over the years and now account for less than 1% of global demand. Even so, the Trump administration's military deployment in the Caribbean is the largest in the region in decades. Mexico and Brazil are among the many Latin American countries warning against the foreign intervention, saying that it risks armed conflict. The heightened geopolitical tensions are helping to drive gold to yet another record high. The precious metal has climbed 1.5% to surpass its October record as traders bet on uncertainty as well as further US interest rate cuts. The gains put gold on track for its best annual performance since 1979. The US and Ukraine have held constructive talks in Florida. That's according to US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, who said that White House officials joined meetings with Ukrainian and European counterparts as part of ongoing efforts to end the war. Speaking ahead of the negotiations, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio described his country's participation in the peace efforts.
We're trying to figure out what can Russia give and what do they expect to get, what can Ukraine give and what can Ukraine expect to get. In the end, the decision will be up to Ukraine and up to Russia. It will not be up to the United States. So that's the role we are trying to play in this.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaking. In a post on social media platform X, the Special Envoy Steve Witkoff said that discussions included Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, top Ukrainian negotiator Rustem Umerov, and other security advisors. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also described negotiations as constructive, but noted that signals from Russia remain, quote, only negative. Kremlin envoy Kirill Dmitriev said that separate talks between Russia and US officials are, quote, proceeding constructively. Justice Department officials were right to remove several images from the Epstein files before they were released, including one of President Donald Trump. This according to Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. An image of a desk drawer with photos, including one showing the future president, was removed and then later restored after the Justice Department determined that it did not depict any Epstein victims. Speaking to NBC, Blanche, a former personal attorney for Trump, said the decision came as a result of court-ordered mandates.
The statute also requires us to protect victims. And so the reason why we are still reviewing documents and still continuing our process is simply that, to protect victims. So the same individuals that are out there complaining about the lack of documents that were produced on Friday are the same individuals who apparently don't want us to protect victims.
US Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche there speaking to NBC's Meet the Press. The redactions prompted criticism from lawmakers, with some accusing the administration of violating the Epstein Files Transparency Act and shielding President Donald Trump, which Blanche denied. Now, Uber and Lyft are teaming up with the Chinese tech giant Baidu to trial driverless taxis in London. The two companies have announced a pilot program which will start in the first half of next year, with commercial services soon to follow. Our reporter James Walcock has more.
It's a core staple of any London taxi ride, a conversation with the driver, whether you want it or not. But it might be on the way out. Baidu and Uber will start testing out Robotaxis next year on the streets of London. They're not the only ones. Tech firms are racing to build data sets for driverless cars. Waymo have already started testing in London, and Lyft will also follow next year. Exciting technology aside, it's not yet clear how the companies will make profits from the ventures. In London, James Woolcock, Bloomberg Radio.
A private equity consortium led by Permira and Warburg Pincus has agreed to acquire Clearwater Analytics. The deal would value the investment and accounting software maker at $8.4 billion, including debt. That's according to a statement from the firm. Also included in the buyout group are Singaporean state investment company Temasek and the technology investment firm Francisco Partners. The transaction is expected to close in the first half of 2026, and it will allow Clearwater to consider rival offers until late January. That in corporate news this morning. Let's get to the markets. MSCI Asia Pacific Index is up by 0.9% this morning. Bit mixed when it comes to futures. Higher for the US. For US Stocks 50 futures, we are down 0.2%. Thinking about gold, $4,400 is where we sit this morning, up by 1.4%. So we've powered through the October record high, 4 billion, which had such a strong year. The uncertainties in Venezuela mean that oil prices are up more than 1% for Brent crude futures, $61.13 the barrel this morning. And then just lastly, in terms of 10-year US Treasury yields, right now they're up a couple of basis points at 4.16. So those are the markets. In a moment, we're going to get into the US actions against Venezuela, this oil blockade, and also what happened over the weekend in these various negotiations over Ukraine in Florida. But before that, another story has caught my eye this morning. An unexpected, fantastic bottle of booze is always welcome around the holidays. This, at least according to Bloomberg's Cara Newman. She has a last-minute list of wine and whiskey for you, indulgent, alcoholic or not, because, as I discovered to my surprise on Sunday, going to some actual physical stores in London, last-minute panic shopping pre-Christmas is definitely not dead. So relax into the festive season with a few of my favourites from this list, including Second Sip, which is a low-alcohol gin, 20% proof apparently. And why don't you blow the doors off with the 1999 Paul Roger Cuvée Winston Churchill at a mere £1,120 for a Magnum. I love the fact that Cara Newman has described all of these wonderful festive treats, and I'm going to put a link to it in our show note. But of course, we aren't ready to put up our feet just yet, glass in hand. No, we've got to get into our top stories today. Now, the United States has intensified an oil blockade off the coast of Venezuela, boarding or pursuing 3 oil tankers in total. Joining me now is Bloomberg's Asia energy editor, Stephen Stapczynski. Good to speak to you, Stephen. Can you just describe the US's maritime maneuvers against Venezuela so far?
You know, it's been really fascinating watching this unfold. So earlier this month, the Trump administration seized a U.S.-sanctioned oil tanker that was carrying about 2 million barrels of oil and from Venezuela. And that was shortly followed by the Trump administration saying that they're going to be having a blockade effectively on all sanctioned oil exports from Venezuela. And so I think there was an expectation that, folks were like, okay, well, if it's a U.S. sanctioned vessel, you're in trouble. If you're not sanctioned by the U.S., you could take your risk, you can go there, but maybe the U.S. won't seize the vessel. They won't board you. They won't have the authority to do that. Well, that's not the case. They boarded a second vessel over the weekend, and this one was not sanctioned by the U.S. It was carrying crude from Venezuela that the U.S. says is sanctioned. The cargo itself is sanctioned. So that was reason enough for them to board the vessel. And then now they're pursuing a third vessel that's not even carrying any crude. It is going to Venezuela, is nearing there. The vessel is viewed to be part of the shadow fleet. and part of the network that ships Venezuela oil elsewhere, like to buyers in China. But it does show that if you're a shipper, if you own a ship, if you're operating in this sector, you're really going to think twice before you go to Venezuela. And if the shadow fleet starts to break down, if Venezuela can't get the ships there to export their crude, well, then they're in a lot of trouble.
So what is President Trump's aim? I mean, is it maximum pressure? Is it war? Is it regime change? Because we know that the US has labeled the Maduro government a drug trafficking cartel, a foreign terrorist organization.
You know, I think it's a bit of all the above, right? I mean, clearly, this is a maximum pressure approach. They are really trying to hit on the economy of Venezuela and tighten that as much as they possibly can, because without oil exports, they're just not making any money anywhere else. There's risks of an economic collapse if this continues. The second thing, obviously, it does seem to be regime change. The Trump administration has been very clear that they think that Venezuela is part of the drug problem in the United States, the illegal immigrant problem in the United States. They've labeled them all sorts of different things. And Trump has said that, attacks on the ground aren't outside of the realm of possibility. So with all of that put together, it does look like the Trump administration wants a regime change, and they're kind of pulling every lever they can, right? Before we saw them pulling the levers by kind of striking the ships that were carrying that they said were carrying drugs or members of the cartel. Now you're looking at them hit ships, of course, by boarding them and harassing them. They're looking at hitting another aspect of their economy.
Yeah, and so then your view on how this affects oil markets and what impact it's having in the oil markets?
You know, I think this is very interesting because this does have to do with oil, and markets are reacting to a degree, but this has far wider impact on Venezuela than it does on the global oil market. China, the U.S., other buyers don't need Venezuelan oil, right? Venezuela exports about less than 1% of global supply. The global oil market is actually in a bit of an oversupply itself. It's going to get worse. That glut is going to get worse in 2026. We have oil prices at the lowest level in more than 4 years. All of that together means that there isn't going to be any impact on inflation. There's going to be no impact on the price of oil at the pump, which is something that Trump really cares about, which also might speak to the timing of all of this as well. Trump knew that, if they were to take Venezuelan oil off the market, it wouldn't see a huge price spike that you would see maybe in 2022 in the height of the energy crisis.
Indeed. Stephen, thank you for speaking to me about this. Stephen Sapczynski is Bloomberg's Asia Energy Editor. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this. Ukraine held these 3 days of talks with the US in Florida over a possible peace deal, while Russia's envoy Kirill Dmitriev held some separate talks with US officials. Joining us now is Tony Halpin, who heads our team covering Russia's economy and government. Tony, hello. Does Ukraine, do you think, have a stronger negotiating position, given that last week we were focused on the EU loan agreement? It was done, that deal. Does that strengthen Ukraine's hand?
Well, I mean, they certainly didn't want to go into these talks and future talks. In fact, without the protection of that loan, Ukraine faced a very real risk by April of simply running out of money, not being able to fund the government or its own defense. And the risk they were clearly aware of was that Russia would take this as a signal that its allies were backing away from Ukraine and would simply run down the clock, knowing that every month that passed would make it more and more difficult for Kiev. So yes, without that loan, their negotiating position would have been a good deal weaker. With it, of course, they can enter the talks knowing that they still have the back of their European allies.
Is Russia's position moving? You were reporting on Friday, Vladimir Putin saying that it was incorrect to say that Russia completely rejected something. This was in that long Q&A that Putin does every year.
Yeah, so he gave a news conference that lasted some 4.5 hours on Friday. And in it, as you say, he did say that Russia is interested in peace and hasn't rejected anything. But they come from two very different starting points here. Putin's starting point is the Anchorage summit with Donald Trump in August in Alaska, where he said that they reached pretty much agreed positions. We don't really know fully what those positions were, but since then, of course, we've had the 28-point plan that the US and Russia drew up, which has been chiseled down to the existing 20-point plan. And there are still elements of that plan that Russia doesn't like. So I think it's very difficult to say that Russia's moved because Putin has a different vision of how this war should end. But certainly there's still a lot to discuss.
What about the war itself? Ukraine continues to be attacked, whilst Ukraine has also itself intensified attacks on tankers tied to Russia's oil trade.
Yes, I mean, the war is going on every day. There's no Christmas or New Year ceasefire on the horizon. Ukraine sees a sore point for Russia in its oil infrastructure. It sees that as a weakness that it can attack to some effect. It believes that by attacking things like oil refineries, oil platforms, tankers, that they can damage Russia's ability to get revenues from oil and gas sales and therefore weaken the Kremlin's war machine over the long term. And they're having some success in that, but at the same time, they're having to defend against constant Russian attacks, both from the air against cities and on the ground, on the battleground, which continues to be a hot one.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.